In the midst of World War II and the Holocaust, many new war technologies came about, such as the use of gases, submarines, and radar. But the greatest of all these new technologies was the atomic bomb.
It was the greatest achievement of the combined efforts of science, industry, labor, and the military in all history. Secretary of War Henry Stimson.
During World War II, the United States feared that Germany would be able to create an atomic weapon. Thus, the American government authorized a plan called the Manhattan Project, in which many scientists would work together to try to beat Germany in the race to make the ultimate weapon. This weapon would increase the efficiency and popularity of science and begin the atomic age.
A few years before the Manhattan Project had been authorized, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had discovered that if the nucleus of an atom is split into smaller pieces, a great amount of energy would be released. They named their discovery fission. If a chain reaction could be sustained, it was theorized that even larger amounts of energy would be emitted, allowing for a massive explosion.
After World War II had been raging for several months, some scientists feared that the Germans were using fission to create the greatest weapon of all time, the atomic bomb.
Leo Szilard, who greatly feared the possibility of a German atomic bomb, went to Albert Einstein and asked him to write a letter to the President, Franklin Roosevelt, explaining the situation and the need to start a program to create a bomb for themselves and save many lives. Roosevelt didn't greatly respond to the letter, but he allowed the scientists the resources they needed to continue experimenting.
On December 7, 1941, 3 years later, we were taken by surprise when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This attack sank or damaged 15 U.S. ships, destroyed 188 airplanes, killed 2,402 people, and wounded many more. This enraged the U.S. so much that Franklin Roosevelt declared war on Japan and entered World War II.
In 1942, almost 4 years after Einstein's letter and the beginning of World War II, the U.S. discovered that Germany was in fact trying to create an atomic weapon. If they were to succeed, the whole world would be in terror of being demolished.
When the U.S. found out about this, they wanted to take action and try to build a bomb for themselves immediately. This was the start of the Manhattan Project. General Leslie Groves, who had just finished building the Pentagon, was put in charge of the project.
The Manhattan Project was as large as the automobile industry and employed about 130,000 scientists, engineers, and construction workers. It was the largest group of scientists ever that had been brought together to work on one project. The project was so huge that it took up 1/10 of the nation's electricity.
The majority of the Manhattan Project took place in 3 secret cities, specifically built for the project. They were Hanford, Oak Ridge, and Los Alamos. They all had different assignments.
Hanford, Washington was assigned to create plutonium, a fissionable material used in the round bomb Fat Man. Oak Ridge, Tennessee was assigned to obtain uranium-235, another fissionable material used in a long, narrow bomb Little Boy.
Los Alamos was where most of the action took place. This site was made to design and create the bomb. The site was headed by Robert Oppenheimer, a physicist who worked at the University of California, Berkeley as a professor.
The mission of Los Alamos was to produce a practical military weapon in the form of a bomb in which energy is released by a fast neutron chain reaction in one or more of the materials known to show nuclear fission. Robert Serber.
A little more than a month before the completion of the bombs, the Germans surrendered, but the United States chose to continue the bomb effort to cause the Japanese to surrender.
In order to test Fat Man, Oppenheimer found a place which they named Trinity. Oppenheimer agreed to the building of the gadget, whose design was similar to Fat Man's. This bomb was to be used in a test bombing. The scientists built a tall tower and dropped the gadget from it. On July 15, 1945, at 5:29:45, the atomic age began.
The explosion went 35,000 feet in 7 minutes, creating a huge smoke mushroom cloud. The explosion was equal to 20,000 tons of TNT. The largest bomb previously had been the British Grand Slam, which was equal to only 12,000 pounds of TNT.
The bomb melted all the sand around it to glass, completely vaporized the tower, and turned the asphalt at the bottom of the tower to green sand. This explosion was on the high end of all the scientists' expectations.
Harry Truman had become president after Franklin Roosevelt's death. He decided to drop the bombs to try to end the war. A target committee at Los Alamos appointed two major Japanese cities to be bombed, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
The uranium bomb Little Boy was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan at 8:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945.
The city was hidden by that awful cloud, boiling up, mushrooming, terrible, and incredibly tall. Paul Tibbets, pilot of the Enola Gay, the plane that dropped the bomb.
The atomic bomb's power was equal to 15,000 tons of TNT.
On August 9, 1945, 3 days after the Hiroshima bombing, the plutonium bomb, Batman, was dropped at 11:02 a.m. over Nagasaki. Its explosion equaled 22,000 tons of TNT.
By 1950, in total, the Manhattan Project caused the deaths of 340,000 Japanese. But because it may have ended the war, it most likely saved countless American lives.
The Japanese finally surrendered and World War II ended.
The creation of the atomic bomb had a positive impact on science.
Before the Manhattan Project, almost all research and experimenting was done on a small scale, with only a small group of people, a very limited amount of money, and no huge equipment. After the Manhattan Project, most experimenting was done on a large scale, by large organizations.
Not everyone agreed that the large-scale researching and experimenting was a good thing for science.
People argued that large-scale science encouraged spending instead of well-thought-out experiments. Others argued that large-scale science could cause people to prioritize a trip to Mars over a cure for cancer. Many older scientists believed that it was against tradition and nature.
However, younger scientists tended to be for large-scale science, and were excited about the new opportunities it provided.
The equipment needed to do the huge experiments scientists came up with costed huge amounts of money. In total, the Manhattan Project costed the United States $2.2 billion.
After the Manhattan Project, state funding for science increased 10 times.
Many institutions were competing for state funding, which also accelerated science. To try to earn funding, organizations would put high emphasis on speed and results. Because of this funding and discoveries made during the Manhattan Project, many new inventions came about. Some of these include the television, the microwave, and the radio telescope.
Another invention that came about because of the Manhattan Project is the nuclear power plant, from which the United States gets 15 to 20% of its electricity.
The Cold War came out of the Manhattan Project. This so-called war lasted for 13 years, from 1950 to 1963. During these 13 years, there was a great amount of tension between the Soviet Union and the U.S. Both countries feared that the other would start a nuclear war by dropping an atomic weapon on their country.
The Manhattan Project helped start this tension by building a weapon of mass destruction. With both countries having them and already enemies, both feared the possibility of a nuclear war.
It was very serious. When we would leave port on our submarine, our job was to hunt Russian submarines. And if anybody ever gave us the order, our job was to kill them. So when we left port, even though we weren't at war, if the message ever came through that we had someone fired nuclear weapons, like Russia launched their missiles or we launched our missiles, there wasn't going to be anybody to say, okay, now it's fine for you to do that. There would be a radio message that would come in, and you would act as if you didn't know what was happening in the rest of the world, but you had a job to do.
Today, because of the creation of the atomic bomb, we have a fear of the whole world demolishing that didn't exist before the Manhattan Project.
The fear that Germany would make an atomic bomb before us started and spurred the Manhattan Project on. Even though the bomb caused many lives to be lost, it positively impacted science.